high-profile way for the governor to begin a series of public policy lectures that he would like to do across the state in the next few weeks, and this will be the first of those. And as you might have guessed, the distinguished guest professor today is in fact the governor of the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, still officially. And we're delighted to have him with us today. And the governor has made it a hallmark of his administration for the last 8 years to actively promote and practically ceaselessly promote investment by the state of Rhode Island in building new facilities at the forefront of science and technology in the state of Rhode Island to lay the kind of foundation that he believed and I believe are critical for your education into the future and for research and development here in Rhode Island as a foundation to Rhode Island's full participation, I think, in the 21st century global economy, which will be based in many, many ways on science, technology, engineering, and related fields, but based in a way that has to take the appropriate, I think, care of our environmental resources and exercise the appropriate stewardship of our environmental resources in order for it to be sustainable, in order for it to be the kind of economic growth and activity that we would see in places like Rhode Island, which have a lot of desirable attributes that we wish to protect and preserve. The governor's been a strong proponent of that as well. And what he wants to talk to you about today is this vision that he's had for the future about the importance of things like marine sciences, environmental science, renewable energy, the life sciences, and advanced manufacturing as building a future for the people of Rhode Island and indeed for Americans. And we're delighted to have him here today. And we're delighted to have an opportunity, I think, to share with him in solidifying a legacy that he spent 8 years, I think, developing as the leader and chief executive of our state. Now, one thing I do wish to share with you, the governor has made it clear that he would like to have a good portion of his time with you today be devoted to discussion, to question, and answers. And I think that's a really important opportunity for all of us to get to hear what you have to think and say about the kinds of things that's going on in your state and here at the University of Rhode Island, to ask questions and to hear the responses and to engage in discussion with Governor Carcieri. So I'm delighted to introduce Governor Carcieri to all of you. I've had many opportunities over the last year and a couple of months to be with him in a number of different forums. I've always been impressed by his commitment to the young people, the students, to higher education in the state of Rhode Island and to the future, your future, here and wherever your dreams and hopes may take you. So we're delighted to have him with us today. Governor Carcieri.
Thank you very much, President Dooley, and let me thank at the outset Dr. Husband. Thank Tom for inviting me in, and I thank all of you for showing up. You know, I kind of pictured coming here and having an empty room, you know, and but no, I really appreciate. But let me pick up on something that the President said. First of all, I'm not a professor to lecture. What I want to do is spend a little bit of time giving you my thoughts and my perception on what we've been trying to do for the last 8 years since I've been in this position. I'll give you a little bit of background how I got here, but really after that, I'm really interested in what's on your mind and hopefully linking all of these different pieces together, because I'm sure, Dr. Husband's been taxing you in terms of, lectures and things that you've got to be cognizant of, and but hoping to broaden the discussion out a little bit. And just by way of full disclosure, my wife is a URI graduate. She was class of '65, first biology major actually. Started out in the nursing program and then changed her mind, and when looked at what course credit she had and what they would qualify for, and sat with her advisors, and they said, well, you know, you got a lot of biology. And I think actually, if the record goes back, I think it was probably one of the first biology majors, and accommodated her. I am a Brown graduate, all right? My wife and I went to high school together, and we graduated. I graduated from Brown one weekend. She graduated here from the university the next, and we got married the next weekend. You could tell I was chasing her for a while. But you never do that. I know that never happens today any longer. Just by way of background, I was never in politics. I in my whole career, after I got out of Brown, I had a whole lot of different jobs and different things. So I spent 10 years in the banking business in the 70s, and then got into a whole series of manufacturing businesses, which I was in for 15, 16 years before I retired in 1997. So I'd never been in the political world. First time I had ever run for public office was when I ran for governor. And so I come at this, and I came at the job, if you will, very much from a business background and a sense of what economies are about. To put some parameters on, when I retired in 1997, the company I was working for, we had plants all over the world. We were doing about $3 billion a year, all manufacturing businesses. I had plants across Europe, across the United States, in Asia Pacific, and Australia, so pretty much around the globe. So I think, and I used to travel a lot visiting those facilities, and got a sense of what was happening from a macroeconomic standpoint, the whole evolution of Asia Pacific, as you will, as an economic power, and that started a couple of decades ago, and as you all know, has accelerated. Now, I give you that as background because when and I'm a lifelong Rhode Islander. I was born in the state. My wife and I, both born in the state. We went to high school together. And as I said, we got married out of college, and we've raised our family here. And the reason I say that is because, and having done business here, I sort of looked at the state and what has happened economically, and what we needed to do, in my judgment, to sort of position the state for the future. I was speaking to a group just a week ago, and for the non-Rhode Islanders, even for the Rhode Islanders that are here, pointing out that in the turn of the last century, not the century, the last century, so 1900, and the turn of that century, Rhode Island was the wealthiest state in the nation per capita. Okay? Rhode Island was the wealthiest state in the nation per capita. And, for the historians, if you go back, it was built on all the manufacturing, all the rivers that are through our state, the Blackstone, the Pawcatuck, all of these, and all the mills. And it was technology, really, that came from Europe in textiles. And most of those mills were producing a whole series of textiles, and Rhode Island was a center for that. In fact, at that time, I saw a stat that says something like 80%, 90%, between 80 and 90%, anything woolen in the United States was actually manufactured and produced here in Rhode Island. And the reason I say that is because when you look around, if you've traveled around the state, you see some of the beautiful history. You see the State House, for example, if you've been to Providence. And in my judgment, it's probably one of the 5 or 6 most beautiful in the country. And I don't say that because I'm biased. I am, but I've actually seen a lot of others and toured the country. The City Hall in Providence, the Federal Building, all these buildings were built around that time and reflected, if you will, the state's prominence in terms of its evolution and its history, and particularly the wealth that had been created in the state from manufacturing in those days. So when I came in, having done business in the state, and having lived here my whole life, and you see how that, and by the way, Rhode Island's not alone. Manufacturing has been declining in the whole nation. Where do we move the state? What are the kinds of things we need to do? What's the economy of the future going to look like? And having, as I said, spent my career in business, and one of the things, it sticks with you as you go through and think about things that I've done. One of the countries that I've always used sort of in describing it to others is Singapore. I don't know if anybody has ever been to Singapore here, right? All right, and if you haven't and you get a chance someday, I highly recommend it because Singapore is just a little tiny island, small island, with no natural resources, none whatsoever. All right, and this is a little country that in the span of 50 years, with no natural resources whatsoever, built the highest standard of living and the highest per capita income in the world. You say, well, how did they do it? The way they did it is they realized that the single best and natural resource, if you will, was their people and the brain power of their people. And I've never seen in history a concentration of effort by a nation to educate all of their young people to a high standard, and then just depend on and have confidence that brain power would find the way, and the ingenuity that would flow from that brain power would build the economic future of that country. And as I said, in 50 years, they went from what was a very poor country to as the most prosperous country in the world today. Now, they also have a benevolent dictatorship. Okay, benevolent. They are, the operative word here is benevolent. But my point is, they mobilized, invested in the brain power of that nation, and built an economic powerhouse. For Rhode Island, if you look at Rhode Island's evolution economically over the years, as I said, we saw our manufacturing base sort of atrophy, and when you look at places like Massachusetts, Cambridge, you look at the Research Triangle in North Carolina, places that have prospered, all right, they managed to shift the focus of their economies into research, technology, innovation, and look for the new opportunities. And it was pretty clear to me that from the standpoint of Rhode Island, when I first came in, we were really lagging way behind there. We had really not put the focus and the attention on that. And so what I did early on, with a tremendous amount of help, and we were down here, I was just with Dean Jordan and the president, and that because we had the topping off, as you know, for the College of Pharmacy, the new building there, and of course we're sitting and surrounded here by, I think, one of the finest facilities of its type anywhere. It makes a real statement that here at the university we're serious about a Center for Biotechnology and Life Sciences, and then the voters just approved, as you know, the bonding, if you will, for a new center for chemistry and forensic sciences. And when you put all that package together here at the north end of the campus, we'll have, in my judgment, a core of capability in terms of resources that is unprecedented really anywhere in the state. And as I say that as a Brown alumnus, all right? But anywhere in the state. In fact, I think I would match it up with anywhere in the country right now in terms of what we have in terms of these kinds of facilities. Now, what we've been trying to do, and there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and I'll pull this all together because investing in buildings and technologies and that is a piece of it, right? But one of the things that we did early on was, I'm not a scientist by background, all right, disclosure. I started out at Brown as an engineer, lasted a year and a half, okay, and then so I love math and that, but switched to liberal arts and majored in international relations, and you know, not being a scientist myself, but understanding that we need to invest in science and technology in this state. We put together what I call the Science and Technology Advisory Council. I did that almost second year. I think I was in office first term. Co-chairing that are Clyde Bryant, who's head of technology, if you will, at Brown, and also Dean Farmer here at the university. Prior to Dean Farmer, Dean Seaman, Jeff Seaman, was actually co-chairing that. And what that was is a group of scientists representing the academic community as well as business leaders that were in businesses related to technology. And what I tasked them with is saying, look, if I put on my business hat, I learned a long time ago that usually if you try and go into an area you know nothing about, all right, the business world is littered with companies that sort of have gone into businesses they had no background in, no understanding whatsoever, and usually they get their heads handed to them, and it usually turns out to be a disaster. The best thing is to build on something you're already good at. And one of the messages I used to have to our businesses is to say, look, where do we need to invest to be world class, to be the best in class at what we do? So I tasked the Science and Technology Advisory Council to look at what we're doing within the state, both at our universities, where we're really strong, and come back and say, give me a list of things, if you will, that we should be investing in to build on strengths that we already have. And growing out of that was also, in addition to that, we formed the Research Alliance, because one of the things that you'll see as you go on and pursue careers and get into research, the funders of research today, much of it the federal government, but also businesses, et cetera, really are looking for collaborative research. They get a little bit tired of saying, I'll fund Dean Jordan, I'll fund Professor Husband, I'll fund this person, and they're all doing similar things. All right. What they prefer to see is a collaborative approach, so that when they put the money into the research, they feel as though they're really capitalizing on the intellectual capabilities and the experience and drawing that together. So that was the driver behind the Science and Technology Advisory Council, and then coming to a research alliance, so that we could actually be putting money through that council into areas where scientists, researchers have come forward and said that there's a whole series of things that they're working on that seem to integrate with what we deem areas that need to be strengthened. So that's what we've been doing in terms of thinking through strategically a vision, if you will, of where the university here has strengths, and clearly you all know what they are, but we're very strong in the biosciences. We're very strong in the Graduate School of Oceanography and all the things around marine science. We're very strong in pharmacy. We're strong and going to get stronger in chemistry. We're strong in engineering here. There's an excellent school of engineering, but the International Engineering program has gone and grown substantially. And so there's a whole set, and there's a whole lot of other things. I'm only using those as examples where we know we have very strong programs. So, and if I look at, let's say, my alma mater, Brown, they are also very strong in a number of the life sciences. They have a medical school. They've just announced they're building a new medical school in downtown Providence. they also are very strong in neurosciences, and have just gotten a collaboration with Rhode Island Hospital. Rhode Island Hospital got a $15 million grant from the Prince Foundation to build the Prince Neurosciences Institute. And when I talk to people, the scientists, not only here but other places, we have an enormous talent in neurosciences. All right, and then also the whole area of what I call my generation, the bionic person. Used to be the bionic man, then the bionic woman. So it's the bionic person. The whole issue of how you take artificial limbs, prosthesis, and connect them, if you will, with the brain, because there's all sorts of research that's been done at Brown and here as well in terms of what we're learning is the brain continues to want to communicate with the limb even though the limb is no longer there. So how do you use nanotechnology? How do you use the expertise here at the College of Pharmacy and collagens? How do you use the expertise at Brown and other places at Rhode Island Hospital and artificial limbs? And how do you pull all that together, if you will, and create, as I said, what I call bionics. The scientists have all fancy names for that, but I like to keep it simple that I understand. And so there's a whole series of expertise, if you will, here in the state around the life sciences, generally speaking, but with very specialized areas, as I said, in neuroscience and some of the work that's done on dementia. And as it relates to neuroscience is leading edge, world class. There's a lot of other pieces. The graduate student, PhD student that just spoke here at the topping out ceremony for the College of Pharmacy is quite interesting in that she's very interested in naturally occurring molecules, whether they're in a marine environment or not, and the implications of the use of application of those molecules in medications, in antibiotics and other things. And so here we've got a graduate school of oceanography that's world class. We've invested there, as you know, in the Pell Center, the Pell Library, the Inner Space Center. Dr. Ballard is doing research and exploration around the world, uncovering things deep in the ocean that we had no idea existed. Molecules or organisms that are surviving and thriving in an environment where we would be dead instantly. All right, in terms of what's occurring deep in the ocean. So there's no doubt in my mind that all of these things start to come together in an opportunity for us, if we invest wisely, to foster the kind of research, the kind of innovation, and out of that, frankly, will be translational research and things that start to happen that in my judgment, will be really the future for our state. Not just our state, by the way. I think this is an issue for the whole nation. We need to sort of redefine who we are and how we compete in the economy of the 21st century as a nation. I'm more interested in Rhode Island, obviously. I'm selfish in that regard. But it will be on the backs of our success in taking what we're good at, where we've got brain power, where we've got the faculty that is well known, and give them the tools, bring in the young people like yourselves, and expose you all to those different disciplines, give you the training, if you will, and hopefully excite you about the potential, because as I sit here today at sort of the end of my business career, the opportunities going forward are more exciting than ever before in so many fronts. And President Dooley mentioned the renewable energy. That there's a whole other area that, as you know, as a state, I've been pushing very hard to to move us into at least some wind power, offshore wind, because nobody's done offshore wind in the United States. It's moving pretty rapidly in Europe, but hasn't been done here. And I think as a nation, again, there's nothing more fundamental to the operation of a country than energy. It underpins everything. And yet we don't have a cogent, coherent strategy as a nation in terms of energy. And I do believe that renewable energy has got a major role to play. And it's like anything else. When you identify something, you put some investment in it, then people will begin to think about better ways, faster ways, and the technology will improve and all of that, and the costs will come down. So that's an area where I believe as a state, and by the way, the Graduate School of Oceanography, a whole bunch of the scientists here at the university have done something that's never been done in the country. We came out with what's called a Special Area Management Plan. That's essentially, think of as a zoning map for the ocean. You're all concerned about, natural resources and the human use of those resources, and that's your the course and the program I know you're taking with Dr. Husband. Well, the same issues are out there in the ocean. Where do you locate offshore wind turbines, particularly if you're going to have utility scale wind farms, as they're called, with 100, 200 turbines? All right, you've got to take account of a whole lot of factors, just as if we were going to build something right here on campus. There's all sorts of environmental analysis that's got to be done. We being the state, spent a year and a half, almost $10 million, and I think upwards of 40 scientists the last time I looked, David, most of whom were you or I scientists, that looked at that whole issue and did a whole series of surveys of the underwater contours of the ocean bottom out there, because that affects what kind of pinning you can do. Looked at obviously the fishing, where the fishing occurs. Looked at the vessel traffic, both commercial and recreational. Looked at all of the migratory patterns of the birds that pass through. All of these things, a year and a half, and came out with a whole map and plan for where we should site these, taking into account of all of those factors. No place else. Right now, that plan is being used as a model. You've read about Massachusetts and their Cape Wind project. It just got federal approval. Believe it or not, Massachusetts hadn't done such a plan. We've actually formed a joint agreement with the state of Massachusetts in developing offshore wind, and they've adopted our SAMP, if you will, because they're so convinced of the science and the thoroughness of all the science that was done in that process. And by the way, right now we expect that the federal government is going to adopt the same strategy, the same plan, if you will, as they look at the whole issue of siting wind farms offshore up and down the coast. So I give that as an example of the university, again, the talent that was here, focusing that on a process and a project and coming out with a result that is, as I said, world-class, and that will advance our whole strategy immensely in my judgment. So science, specific areas that we're already strong at, strengthening those, making the investment, and the taxpayers have been very supportive of the university. And the president just cycled through all the things in the last 7 or 8 years. If you look over 10 years, the amount of money, I think the big 3 projects that we're talking about, over $200 million, $210 million invested here. If you add all the other pieces that have been going on, I'm sure it's over $500 million over the last several years being invested in this university to move our level of, if you will, of science up a notch. And as the president likes to say, you think big, and we are. and we're investing in that. In all these pieces, because there's so much excitement right now. I just saw some stats the other day that I think you surpassed $100 million in external research money here at the university, all right, that has been attracted in all the different areas. My alma mater, I think, is a similar amount, all right. The lifespan, which is all of the Rhode Island Hospital and the allied hospitals and that, the $75 million of external research money that was come in. And so if you add up a lot of the other pockets, all right, there's a big, healthy increase in research money coming to Rhode Island, coming to URI, coming to our universities. And I was here just, I guess a couple months ago when we announced that NSF had given the university $20 million, the largest grant in the university's history, to stimulate collaborative research in marine life sciences. So all of the pieces begin to come together, and then external funders, if you will, are beginning to realize that, and my judgment are going to realize it at a growing rate, particularly as the new chemistry building comes on stream. And growing out of all of that, at the end of the day, in my judgment, will be a whole new level of innovation and new technology and new things that, as I sit here, and I've got 11 of my 14 grandchildren that are still in Rhode Island, so I want to see them have all the opportunities. I want you to have the opportunities, but I think that's what's going to fuel the kind of creativity, the kind of imagination that turns some of these ideas and some of this research into solving life's problems. And because, at the end of the day, my wife, who as I said is the scientist of the family, keeps reminding me, she says, Don, she says, remember, it's the scientists and their research that are solving the problems. They're coming up with the solutions. Not only, because I tend to think, I always tend to think in business terms. That's just the way my mind works. How do you turn these things into, growing businesses? Because you see that happening all over, and I want to see that happen here. But she's quick to point out, she said, Don, it's not always just turning into a business. It's solving real problems. And that's what science is all about. I think one of the things, and I'm going to stop and kind of, let's get a conversation going. I'm just trying to give you pieces of what the strategy has been from an investment standpoint, but understand that this is a strategy where these pieces all sort of link together. This is not just random here or there. We've had an advisory council, as I said, Science and Technology Advisory Council, that's been guiding some of this, the research focus, but also a lot of the input from the university team here, as well as other universities in the state. Right now, I think there's more conversation between the leadership of our higher ed institutions than it's ever been. All right, IBM put a supercomputer into Brown last year. I guess one of the 400 or 500 top computers in the world. And the point was that was to be used by all the institutions of higher education in our state, by the scientists, so that they can use that capacity. Similarly, as I said, the NSF grant was to encourage collaborative efforts in research. So you take the best brain power we've got in a lot of different places, harness it, focus it, and see if we can make strides faster, which is no question in my mind we will. I think the other thing that, because President Dooley mentioned, what you're studying, in terms of natural resources, the human use of natural resources in the broadest context. And I've often felt that there's this artificial juxtaposition between a good and clean environment and a thriving business community. I think the two things go together. from all of my years, as I said, in lots of different businesses. You absolutely can, and in fact, the technologies that will drive, a better environment are opportunities. Just as renewable energy, for example, is an opportunity versus fossil fuels and all of the issues that come from extracting fossil fuels. And I think generally, not only the opportunities, but I like to say at the end of the day, one of the attractions of Rhode Island that I think is huge is it's a beautiful place to live. We're a small state, but it's a beautiful state. We are blessed with beautiful natural resources. And I don't know about you, I've always found people are attracted to attractive places. I don't know a whole lot of people who say, hey, I want to go to that ugly place. That's where I want to live, or that's where I want to go. So preserving, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time here, but another whole piece of what we've been doing as part of this strategy is preserving our state and our environment. The Combined Sewer Overflow Project in Providence, one of the largest capital projects in the state's history, was to clean up what was coming into the head of Narragansett Bay and make sure it was being processed. We've set aside in the last, I think, 7 or 8 years, something over 10, 12,000 acres of land that were farms that where the state and local conservation trusts have bought the development rights, so the farmers, we have gotten some capital so that they can be financially stable, but the farms will be preserved and operate as farms, and the land will not be developed. And you all know, even the out-of-staters, if you go from here west, it's mostly woodland and farmland, and the vast majority of that is preserved. It cannot be developed. And a whole series of things, a lot of things that we've been doing to preserve the beauty, preserve the environment, because I think that's part of what will make us a place where people like yourselves will want to stay here and raise families or whatever, but build careers here. That it's a beautiful place. And in my business career, and this is finished with this one, and then just kind of let's get a conversation going. One of the companies that we used to sell, we made nylon fiber that we actually colored. And it was a special technology for coloring nylon 6 and 6/6. But one of the major companies that used that was a company called Interface that made carpet tiles. You don't have them here, but carpet tiles. And as a company, and this goes back to late 80s, really, they were focusing on how to make sort of cradle to grave, completely recycle the carpet tile. So the fiber, the plastic fiber, in this case nylon 6 or 6/6 that went into that, when those tiles were worn, the system to collect those, bring those back, recycle that fiber, and use it again. And we were, one of the companies that we had early on was a company that took plastic bottles, your Coke and bottles, which are polyester, and recycle those. And instead of landfilling them, recycle and taking that making fiber out of that. So there's a lot of, in my business career, I've seen the benefits of what you can do from an economic standpoint, being smart about the environment and technologies, and as I say, the two fit together. In my judgment, they absolutely fit together. So that's sort of the broad strategy. You're right in the center of it, right here, because I firmly believe that one of the engines to grow our state economically into the future is the University of Rhode Island, and the capability that is here, the talent that you all represent, that we will attract, and in that brain power that we develop, And along the way, I'm absolutely convinced that some of you are going to come up with great ideas and be entrepreneurs and stay here and grow the economy of our state, because that at the end of the day is what we would like to see happen. So let me stop there. I hope I give you a little bit of food for thought. I haven't talked too much politics, have I? And I'm on my way out. All right, I'm term limited, so as the president said, the new governor takes office January 4th, but I think after 8 years of this, I have a pretty good perspective on the state and what we need to do. But come on, let's get a few questions. Let's get the discussion going here. What's on your mind? Have I made any sense whatsoever, or are you saying, hey, you don't know what you're talking about? Yeah.
All right. Thank you for speaking to us. It's really cool. I'm an aquaculture and fisheries management major at the school, and it's kind of odd to me that we live in the ocean state, and our pharmacy building is getting built. It's brand new, and we have a new chemistry building, which is going to help my major. But my major just lost 2 professors, or one's leaving this semester. We have 4 professors in the whole major. I just don't see any development, really. And I think that's kind of weird in a place like the ocean state, I lived in Rhode Island my whole life. It's just, I don't know. I don't feel betrayed. That's not what I'm saying. But it's just a little discouraging, I guess, is really it.
Yeah, I can't respond, and I'd have to have Dr. Husband in terms of what's happening here. Let me just say that I have long felt that aquaculture was something that we should be a lot farther along on than what I see. Now, having said that, Perry Rasso? Okay, Perry's a good URI graduate, all right, who's going on, and that's the Matunic Oyster Bar. I know you never have enough money to spend on a meal, right? But one of the hot new restaurants in the state is right down on East Matunic Road, and it's a Matunic Oyster Bar, and it's Perry Rasso who owns that, who was a URI grad, who's now cultivating oysters. And in fact, that's a great success story, oysters are right now, because if you look at the history of Rhode Island, and by the way, we're not alone, but there was a pretty thriving oyster industry here in the state, and then it sort of disappeared. And there have been efforts to, restart that, and it is really moving very, very well. Not just Perry, but there are others, URI affiliates, Roebuck, that's doing them in Point Judith Pond. We're pushing. Again, disclosure. I grew up on Narragansett Bay. My dad was a football, basketball coach at East Greenwich High School, and every summer from the time he was 14 years old, he shellfished, he quagged. They call it bull raking here, so I grew up with that. So I think I understand quags, and there are also some real efforts at doing what we can to seed those and keep that industry healthy. I said in my retirement, I'm going to come back because scallops, bay scallops. When I was a youngster, and the out-of-staters are saying, "Hey, the governor's going crazy here. He's just selling Rhode Island products." But Rhode Island bay scallops, which are small ones, the shells are about that size, the scallops in there are about the size of the end of your thumb, are the sweetest, tastiest scallops in the world, bar none. Bar none. But there are no scallops. And so I keep asking, what do we have to do? Why aren't there scallops? There used to be, a thriving scallop trade here. And lastly, we meet with the New England governors, meet twice a year, actually once a year, with the Eastern Canadian premiers. So that's the maritime premiers in Canada. So Quebec and then all of the Maritimes. And we went up to Newfoundland, Labrador about 4 years ago. And we had a delegation because actually they're well along, aquaculture, particularly fish farming, et cetera. A number of them in Nova Scotia, some New Brunswick, but they're pretty advanced in aquaculture. So we had a delegation from the university here and others to go up to say, how can we spur a piggyback on some of the things that they're doing. Plus, we have technologies in feed systems, disease systems, and so forth that could be applicable. So, I'm sort of with you. I think there's something that's a natural for us. What's happened here at the university that I can't speak to specifically. So, yeah. That's all right. Shout it out. I'll repeat it.
You talked a lot about our research and innovation and how that's going to move us forward. Then you hinted at the very end about how we tie that into the business side. I guess I'm concerned with the practical approach of that and how we begin to create jobs in this small state, especially with one that has such a high unemployment rate. So how do we create jobs for those people that don't have jobs, as well as those of us coming out of school here in the next 1, 2, or 3 years that are going to have all this information from this research and innovation? How do we apply that to our economy?
Yeah. Well, I think that the truth is these things take time. Right? What I'm describing as a strategic investment that's been going on, the results of which, beyond the research, okay, because I think for those that are going on for advanced degrees, et cetera, I think you're going to see more research money flowing into the university here, as well as other universities. So those are opportunities because it's going to take scientists and grad students, et cetera, to do that research. The business spin-offs, I think, are the kinds of things that truthfully take time. They're not going to happen like that. I wish they would. I wish the state had invested in this, 20 years ago. If we'd been on this track 20 years ago, my response would be, I think you'd be seeing lots of things happening right now. Having said that, I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to accelerate faster than maybe a lot of people expect. I'll give you an example. Draper Labs, which is a prestigious lab in Cambridge, grew out of MIT. Much of their work is defense related. They are coming here to Rhode Island. They have an arrangement with Brown right now, but we are looking at, with the university here, we're looking at a collaborative, putting some funding together for them to build a research facility. Initially, probably be 20, 25 scientists. But they're very exciting. The focus of that research, unlike what they're doing now in Massachusetts, would be renewable energy. All the issues around, for example, grid. The grid itself is inefficient. You lose a lot of energy in the way the grid is constructed. You're all talking about smart grid. But also, all the things around technology, blade designs, for example, for turbines. There's a whole theory now that you don't need these big blades, like a jet engine kind of thing. Smaller, more efficient, and just as, but it's a different kind of turbine. So that would not have occurred at all. Now, it's not going to be huge, as I said, 2025, but it's a start, and all these things. Take time. You seed some things, they start, and hopefully, if you've been smart about it, they grow. But I don't expect that you're going to see anything big. I think the biggest potential in terms of jobs is probably the offshore wind. Because to build those, and we've gotten through the hurdles, and we will be, I think, the permit issued soon for the first phase, which is 8 turbines off Block Island. That's relatively small. That's more like a pilot or a demonstration. But the company that we're working with has already filed with the federal government for a permit to build a 110 turbine wind farm 20 miles out. So you won't even be able to see it from Block Island or Martha's Vineyard or anywhere. All right? It's that far out where the wind is better, et cetera, et cetera. The estimate is that just to construct that wind farm is upwards of 1,000 people. All right? And again, that's, in my judgment, that's just the beginning. Because if Cape Wind happens, which it will, we've got our project going. You're seeing now development of projects for offshore wind up and down the East Coast. Quonset, right here, is ideally suited to service that kind of developing industry. And in fact, our agreement with the people that we're working with on our project, because they're bidding on other wind farms up and down the coast, they bid on one in New Jersey, for example, is that any projects they do will be built, that will all be built here at Quonset. And now why that's important, because as you see things start to happen, then it's not just building the wind farms themselves. The people that build these turbines, which are enormous, and the turbines are getting larger, because obviously if you put a platform in the middle of the water out there, if you got a bigger turbine, it means you get more energy for the fixed cost of the platform. So there's a push. Turbine manufacturers, we've had 3 already come through the state, and they understand that as this develops as an industry, Quonset is perfectly sited for turbine manufacturing, because these, as I said, these things are huge turbines that have to be barged out to these sites. Same thing with blades. So, again, this will take, our project will move, Cape Wind is moving, but I think it's one of those things that we'll look back 10 years from now, and I suspect you will see thousands of jobs being spun out, and good paying jobs with a whole range of capabilities that will spin out of that. That's probably the biggest short-term, biggest potential in terms of job impact. The other things in terms of the research and the spin-outs of the research will be smaller.
As far as the new buildings that are going to be built on the campus, how much of the budget planning includes sustainable energy and renewable resource connections?
Yeah, that's, again, the good news, and probably Bob Wagan would be the best when they give you all the details on that. But the good news is this building, I think, received silver leads. Yeah, leads, gold. Did we get gold? Okay, all right. I couldn't remember if it was silver or gold LEED certification. This building was designed architecturally and engineered and so forth to meet the higher standards in terms of energy usage and efficiency, etc. The same thing we're striving for with the College of Pharmacy. All of the buildings, we set as a strategy, if you will, from the state perspective, that any new buildings and new construction going on should be striving for the highest levels of sustainability and energy efficiency and all of that. So we've made that a real push and a focus, and this building is a great example, but we've got a number of them.
I'm a double major in marine affairs and communications, and I got a minor in natural resource science. And with all your introductions to like the pharmaceuticals and stuff to the state, I was wondering how you feel about the management of Rhode Island's like freshwater resources on like the overall.
I think that this is really, I have the discussion going on pretty regularly with the Department of Environmental Management, because we have done an excellent job acquiring more natural resources and preserving more space, etc. The truth is, at the end of the day, we're being taxed in terms of the resources to manage those well, because the reality, unfortunately, right now in Rhode Island, like most states in the nation, are suffering badly from the recession, and the revenues that the state has received from income tax, sales tax, and the main sources are down like 15% from where they were 2-3 years ago. Doesn't sound like much. It's about $500 million. Okay, that's the difference between what the revenue coming into the state today and what it was. And so, like every state, like right now, are kind of struggling because we don't have the resources we would like to have to do a better job of managing those resources. I know whenever I talk to Director Sullivan, he's saying, Governor, I need this, I need that, I need people to do this, and he does. But right now we just can't afford it. So we're at one of those places where we're protecting more, we're grabbing more land and making sure it's preserved properly. But the truth is, you're right, we're sort of struggling with the resources to make sure that we're managing it as best we could, because I think we could be doing. He's in there. He's, by the way, doing some creative things as well. He's looking at wind and turbines and other renewable energy things as a way to lower the operating costs of some of these things. I don't know if you've been down to Point Judith or to Galilee, and we redid the beach down there right along the breakwaters you come in, and they put up a little wind turbine, not big, but it'll power, I guess, most of that building, and they got plenty of wind down there. Now, what time do they got to be back out of class? I thought it was okay.
It's a great pleasure having you here. I'm not from this country, so the only thing that bothers me is everything's either about the state or about the country. The amount of money that the state is putting in this university, y'all do realize that other countries, like third world countries, can actually have an entire life with that much money. That's only put in one building, probably, an entire area, like entire town. It's really frustrating to see.
Where's your home?
India.
India, okay.
And it's really frustrating to see this because so many products, like most of the things that I get here, everything's either made in India, either made in China or Bangladesh. If third world countries or countries like India, China, and Pakistan give so much to U.S., why can't they give little to the countries that they earn so much from? Your economy benefits from it, but when we live back home, we don't have any standard of living compared to this. So it's really unfair to see this. Like if you put $200 million in a university, I'm pretty sure that back home there are people who don't even know how to count that much money. Yeah,
it's a great perspective. One of the things I didn't say, between my banking career and my manufacturing career, my wife and I took our family, we went overseas. We lived actually in the Caribbean, lived in Jamaica for 1.5 years, and I worked for a private voluntary organization. And so I used to travel to the small islands, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica. And, in my business career, traveled, as I said, to a lot part of the world. And, I used to say to people when I got back, the average American doesn't realize how good they've got it, because the vast majority of the world is living at a standard so far below what we have taken for granted for the last 100 years, probably, in this country. So you're absolutely right. The good news, and this is one of the real debates in this country today, because we have an enormous trade deficit with India, the United States, with India, with China, and with Asia Pacific generally. And there's a whole body of people. You'll see it in some of the political debate. Well, we're losing jobs. So all that manufacturing used to be done here, and so how how do we equalize this, and how do we keep some of the jobs here as opposed to going overseas to some of those countries, or fostering the growth of jobs in those countries. And that's I think the whole issue of fair trade is a legitimate debate. I think, though, people often, and you appreciate it, lose sight of the fact that you can't have a world where you've got big chunks of the world that are so far below other parts of the world. And so if you stand back from a macroeconomic standpoint, you say to yourself, it's the right thing over time for the standard of living of those parts of the world to begin to rise. It has to. So the question, and what I used to say from a business perspective, I said it's not a threat. We're looking at it incorrectly if we view the growth of China or India and their standard of living as a threat. I'm just not talking from a business perspective. A business person here in this country should look at it as an opportunity, because to the extent the standard of living is rising, that's a whole new universe, if you will, of consumers that have the potential to buy product from us. So it's a question of, I think, us as a nation figuring out how we balance those things, and how do we accommodate understanding that a whole part of the world inevitably needs to rise in terms of their standard of living, and we just need to figure out how we accommodate that in a fashion that we don't wind up feeling as though it's at the cost of this nation. I think it doesn't have to be and shouldn't be, but you bring a whole perspective, because you're absolutely right. Got time for one more?
Just a quick comment in response to the student that talked about the fisheries. And you responded with the Matunic Oyster Bar and our alum who owns that. Recently, he was invited to China by 2 Chinese people who were down at the Oyster Bar, and the Chinese government paid for Perry to go there because they felt that he was so much more advanced than what they know over there, and they would like Perry to teach them. So I don't know what the future of that will be, but I thought it was great that they acknowledged our Perry.
They understood something we were doing well, and they're smart enough to figure out how do we get it. But I think the question is still, I would like to see more of that happening. I don't know what the impediments are right now that are holding that back, but I think that you're absolutely right. Well, listen, you've been great. I hope I've given you some things to think about, but wish you all well. You're part of a great university that is going from strength to strength, and I'm really pleased to be here, so thank you.
Thank you very much.